all of this with Alex Traiman. He's the CEO of Jerusalem Bureau Chief at Jewish News Syndicate. Welcome to First Edition.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Alex, I'd like you to describe the innovative, the amazing strategy where the Israelis dressed up as Palestinians, moved into the neighborhood, posed as new neighbors, and actually figured out where these hostages are.
Exactly. They had actually rented an apartment in the Nusrat village where the hostages were taken. And that's how they gathered information on where the hostages were specifically located. And even on the day of the rescue, they had rented an aid truck with Gazan license plates and used that in order to get up close to the building before they were able to enter.
Amazing.
So what other missions and operations are scheduled that you can speak about to rescue the remaining hostages?
We don't know about any of the missions. If there are missions in planning, they're certainly held under wraps because any word of such rescue missions that could get out would basically result in those hostages being moved, as we saw in the Al-Shifa hospital. If you can remember back early in the war, Israel wanted to go into this hospital that was the command center for Hamas. The United States held up that mission. Israel basically had to telegraph its attack. They did go into the hospital about a week later, but then all of the hostages that were inside that building, along with the terrorists and weaponry, were moved out in advance. So you can't really get word about any of these types of operations before they happen.
You know, you have to wonder why the Americans aren't trying to get the American hostages out using these unique covert operations.
Well, we heard this past week that the United States would consider operations or specific negotiations with Hamas only for American hostages. But really, they should be working for all of the hostages.
Of course.
Israel's an ally of the United States, and they should be working to bring them all back. Anthony Blinken said this week after Joe Biden had put what he claimed was an Israeli offer on the table, that it was clear now that Hamas was not operating in good faith. But Blinken should have understood on October 7th, when Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis and kidnapped 250 plus others, that Hamas was never operating in good faith to begin with.
Savagery.
So Israel and the Lebanese Iran-backed Hezbollah ramping cross-border attacks after months. Why are tensions boiling over at this point in time?
Well, tensions have been boiling really since October 8th. Hezbollah has been firing at Israel incessantly, and Israel actually removed 80,000 of its citizens from near the border. But certainly in the last weeks and even in the last days, the attacks on Israel have intensified dramatically. And part of that is because they see the pressure that the United States and Western powers are putting on Israel not to have a total victory in the Gaza Strip. And they also see the pressure that's being put on Israel not to respond to Hezbollah's attacks. So when they see that, when Iran sees that, they're basically laughing at Israel, and they're testing to see how much they can get away with, firing over 200 rockets at Israel on our holiday just 2 days ago, the holiday of Shavuot, firing another 150 rockets yesterday, and knowing that Israel has basically two hands tied behind its back in terms of responding to this in full force, which most Israelis believe needs to happen sooner than later.
Are Israelis aware of how much anti-Semitism is now threatening Jews in New York City, for example, which has the largest Jewish population in the world? We're seeing almost daily now literal attacks on the homes of Jews, on Jewish students, on Jews in the subways. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking, but in some ways not a surprise, because we've really seen how anti-Semitism has been latent on the university campuses for the last 20 plus years already. We've seen how anti-Semitism was lurking on social media, and all it took was October 7th to allow all of this anti-Semitism to come out of the shadows, and the cat's now out of the bag. But really, this has been part of Hamas's strategy the entire time. They never thought that they would defeat Israel Israel on the battlefield. They had hoped that by planting all these seeds of anti-Semitism and gaining control of social media, gaining control of the universities, gaining control of most of the mainstream media, that they would be able to sow public opinion in a very powerful and potent way against Israel and the Jewish people, and they've succeeded in that strategy.
Biden speaking briefly about Israel at the G7 summit, saying he's not confident about a ceasefire. What are your thoughts?
Well, Hamas has never wanted a ceasefire. I mean, they've made that clear since the very beginning, and they're going to hold hostages until the very end. And as they see more pressure on Israel to stop the fighting, that is actually incentive for them not to release hostages, but to continue to hold them longer and longer. And I'm glad that the Biden administration seems to be waking up to the fact that you're not going to reach a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. They believe that as long as they can wave the banner of victory in the end of the war, regardless of how much damage Israel does, that they are the victors, that they are more powerful than the IDF. And unfortunately, until now, the Biden administration has been playing into that. Let's see now if with these statements, if they've come around and will fully back Israel to remove Hamas from power, both as a military force as well as a political force.
And I don't know how much longer any hostages can stay alive when you hear the details, the accounts of torture provided by the hostages who were rescued earlier this week.
Yeah, the hostages that were rescued this week, at least they were in houses where they had access to sunlight from time to time. Some of these other hostages are believed to be held in the tunnels underneath Gaza Strip without access to sunlight. Many of them are suffering malnutrition and starvation. Israel believes that at least a third of the remaining hostages are dead, perhaps more, and yet Israelis are very strong. And God willing, we'll see more rescue operations like the one we saw last week in Nusrat with good news of 4 hostages coming home.
I hope so. Thank you, Alex Traiman.
Thanks for having me.
The day's top headlines are next.